Hello, and how are you? My name is Alexis Terry. I am the founder of Twisted Teaching Educational Consulting Company. And today in this session, we're going to talk about real love as a strategy for reaching students when they see no way out. And if we want to be really honest about the times that we are living in right now, a lot of our students don't see a way out, which is why you don't see them showing up. So let's go ahead and jump in. So before we talk about the concept of real love, I want to tell you guys a little bit about myself. My name, again, is Alexis, which you guys can see here. And I am a educator. I've been in the classroom for about 11 years. So I've taught at the secondary level and the collegiate and graduate level. I am the founder of Twisted Teaching Educational Consulting Company, where our goal is to build educators' capacity and effectiveness to reach and teach all students through culturally responsive learning environments and instructional practices. I am the author of the book, Real Love Strategies for Reaching Students When They See No Way Out, which this presentation is kind of centered around. And I'm also a doctoral student, and I'm currently pursuing a PhD in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in urban education. So my research interests include teacher preparation, culturally responsive pedagogical practices, culturally relevant pedagogical practices, and then culturally responsive teaching with technology. So let's talk about why are we here today. I wrote Real Love well before the pandemic started, but it is so timely right now that it gives me chills when I think about a, just how God works, and b, how this book is serving as a tool to really transform teachers mindset and teachers instructional practices, and creating educators who are being intentional about reaching and teaching all students. So let's talk about why we're here. um Last week I had the opportunity to sit and a presentation with Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings. And for those who don't know who she is the mother, the founder of culturally relevant teaching, what she calls just good teaching. And she said, we are currently in the middle of four pandemics, not one, but four. We're in the middle of the pandemic caused by COVID-19. We are in the middle of a racial pandemic, um, through what we've seen through the protests that are just ravaging throughout our country, and this cause for acknowledging Black Lives Matter. We are in an economic pandemic where millions of Americans have lost their jobs and are living day by day. And we are witnessing a climate pandemic where the weather is getting crazier each day. I know that my home state of California, parts of it have been burned down. If we look at some of our coastal areas throughout the United States, they're being hit by hurricanes. Tornadoes are just popping up in some of the strangest places. And so while all of this is going on in our country and throughout the world, this is happening. And so, because of the pandemic that we are facing caused by COVID-19, virtual instruction has pretty much become our new norm. Some are doing it fully virtual. Some students are doing it in a hybrid model. But considering the circumstances, we are doing a great job. But the sad reality is this: combined with the pandemics that we are experiencing and the virtual instruction that we have been forced to make our new norm, as we wrap up one semester and introduce ourselves to a new semester, we start a new semester, reports after reports of students failing at least one course is popping up. And while it's easy for us to point the finger at everything outside of the school, what parents can do and what communities can do, I think that we are here today and participating in this summit because we are solution oriented, and we're looking for ways to increase our effectiveness and ability to reach and teach every student when we start next semester, and as we make our way through next semester and even next year. And so I want to talk about what we can do as educators to reach and teach all students. But before we jump in, I think it's really important that I share with you guys a little bit about me more than just my basic introduction. Um, I am a lover of photos. I'm a person who can sit on Instagram all day. I can sit on Facebook all day. One thing looking back I appreciate about my childhood is that my grandmother, she took very, very, very good care of photos and was very intentional about creating photo albums. And so, honestly, sometimes I feel sorry for my kids because if something happened to my phone, their whole childhood is gone. But when my grandmother passed, she left us with tons of photo albums filled with photos from birthday parties, family gatherings, and vacations. And from these photos, I was able to make sense of my childhood. You hear the story that every picture, I mean the phrase "every picture tells a story." So I want to show you guys a picture. Now we're not going to turn and talk, but I do want you to think about this. In this photo, what do you see? What do you wonder? What story does it tell? Okay. So think about this. What do you see? What do you wonder? And what story does it tell? So when you look at this photo, you see a graduation. It is the class of the 90s, so 91, maybe 92, because they're the graduating class of 2008. This photo, if you look right slap dab in the middle, that is me here in the pretty white dress and the patent leather shoes. That is me graduating from my early childhood learning center. Okay. And so you see this picture and you may see just some surface level things about me. I look really, really happy, right? I'm so excited. But what you don't see in this image is what's really, really important, right? I think right now we're seeing a lot of students not showing up to school, but we're not questioning what are we not seeing. So what you don't see in this image is a young girl who experienced abuse and neglect at an early age and was often sent to school dirty and hungry. I was often teased by other kids. I was even shunned by my teachers. They didn't want to be around me. They didn't want to be around my siblings because we were those kids who showed up just unkept. Um, what you don't see is a little girl who was described by her teachers as not happy. I lacked initiative. I did not want to learn. And honestly, if back then were now, I wouldn't have showed up. I wouldn't have showed up. What you don't see is a girl who, from an early age, was always uncertain about my next meal, where I would sleep that night, or if I would even be picked up from school. What's also missing from this image is my mother and my father because they were both drug addicts and in jail. Majority of my life, I was raised by my grandmother, my uncle, who stepped in, and a lot of where I am today is because of them. You don't see my siblings who also experienced years of neglect before I was even born. And the last thing that you don't see are the teachers. On the other side of this bench is Miss McDowell. And my life story would not be what it is either without Miss McDowell. She was my preschool teacher. When my older brother and I were placed in her class, she said she hated when we came to school because she had never experienced working with kids who were crack babies, or she had never witnessed firsthand accounts of child abandonment and neglect. Years later, she admitted that she did not like when my brother and I came to school because we were always so dirty and so smelly. She shared that one day she couldn't take it anymore. So when my brother came to school dirty again, She took him in the janitor's closet. And that was at a time when you could do that. And she gave him a bath. And my brother looked her in her eyes and said, "Thank you, Miss McDowell." And from there, she stopped looking at what she saw in front of her and started digging for what was underneath our rag and tag surfaces. She ended up just caring for me and my brother like we were her own. She brought us clothing. She would often feed us. She took us home when we were yet again left at school by our mom. And I guess honestly, she was doing a great job with what she was doing because just in a desperate state, my mother felt like she couldn't care for us anymore before she handed me and my three siblings, or my two siblings at that time, over to my grandmother. She tried to convince Miss McDowell, my preschool teacher, to adopt us, but honestly, that obviously that was something she couldn't do at this time. And so while every picture tells a story, they often leave out important pieces of the story. And so in my life, there are two important pieces that are critical to understanding who I am and what inspires the work that I do. And those two pieces are teachers and real love. When I share my story, the question is always asked: how did you do this? How did you go on to become the first in your family to graduate from high school? How did you go on to become the only person in your family that has not suffered with a drug addiction? And excuse me for the emotion, but I want you guys to see and understand it. How did you go on to become an educator who is effective in your classroom? What inspires the work that you do? And honestly, the answer is less about me and more about the educators who showed up for me, and they gave me the real love that I needed when I didn't see a way out. And there are a lot of students right now that are sitting in your classrooms, are not sitting in your classrooms. They're sitting behind blank, dark screens, and they don't see a way out. But when I tell you about the power that we possess to transform students' lives, I hope that you guys leave here understanding the power of real love. And so, what is real love? Um, Before I talk to you guys about the concept of real love and the model that my former teachers provided for me, I like to say that the real love is grounded in three things: my personal experiences, my professional experiences, and my pedagogical practices and love for the work of Gloria Ladson Billings and Geneva Gay and Dr. Christopher Emden and Zaretta Hammond. Honestly, it wasn't until I looked back and was able to have an understanding of what a culturally responsive educator was, and be able to take my now knowledge and apply it to then, that I really understood what it looked like. And so using my personal experiences and my professional experiences and my research of culturally relevant teaching and culturally responsive pedagogy and reality pedagogy, I came up with the concept of real love to support educators in being able to reach, teach, and empower all students. But most importantly, the students who are in those vulnerable communities that live in urban communities, like my community that I grew up in, South Central Los Angeles. And so, since my work is rooted in culturally relevant and culturally responsive pedagogy, it's important that I frame the work that I do. Okay, so think about your entry point. What do you know about culturally relevant teaching practices, culturally responsive teaching practices? And so I'm going to kind of just go through it really, really quick. So, according to the founder of Culturally Responsive Teaching, the Gloria Ladson Billings, culturally relevant teaching is a pedagogy that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And so, through culturally relevant teaching, it must yield academic success. Okay. Teachers must help students develop positive ethnic and cultural identities while helping them achieve academically. Teaching must develop students' critical consciousness to and prepare them to challenge current status quo and the current social order, or to recognize, understand, and critique current social inequalities. Okay. When we look at culturally responsive teaching, the work of Geneva Gay, which will influence the work of Zaretta Hammond, culturally responsive teaching uses the characteristics, experiences, and perspective of ethnically and culturally diverse students as conduits for teaching them more effectively. So CRT, culturally responsive teaching, and culturally responsive pedagogy is pedagogy in practice. It's how we use strategies and practices to develop our knowledge about cultural diversity, and then also help students develop their knowledge and build their cultural competence. It's how we include ethnic and cultural diversity in our curriculum, and it's how we demonstrate caring for students, building these culturally responsible, loving, and learning communities where students know that we care for them and not just about them. And it's how we communicate with ethnically diverse students and families and respond to this diversity through the delivery of our instruction. Now, jumping to my boy, Dr. Emdin. Honestly, Dr. Emdin's work is really what fuels my work. And so building on the research of Ladson Billings and Geneva Gay, Christopher Emdin, he created tangible tools that what he says not necessarily offer with culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. And so these tangible tools are to support educators in becoming transformative pedagogues and effective teachers. And so reality pedagogy is this approach to teaching and learning that has a primary goal of meeting each student on his or her cultural and emotional turf by making the local experiences of students visible and creating context where there is a role reversal that positions the student as the expert of knowledge in their own teaching and learning. And so he has these 7 strategies for effective teaching. And the first one is cognitive dialogues, which are these structured exchanges where students and teachers develop strategies for instruction that focus on students' social, emotional, and academic needs. Co-teaching is allowing students to share their gifts and knowledge by designing lessons and teaching the teacher and their peers. Cosmopolitanism is where students become active participants and how their learning spaces function. And then he encourages educators to bring the context of students' communities into their classroom and then take your classroom out into students' community. And then through your content, showing students what it looks like sometimes to not be the expert of something. And so we want to model that vulnerability and the fact that we too struggle sometimes with grappling content with competition. An effective strategy for teaching is creating a space where we allow students to compete with one another that can lead to these positive emotions, foster collaboration, and make content more relevant. And then he encourages educators to constantly collect, annotate, and preserve information to go back and reflect on to strengthen their teaching practices. So I want to show you guys this quick little video, just so that way we can get a better understanding of culturally responsive, culturally relevant teaching and what it is and what it's not. Okay, so go ahead and take a look.
I think people, when they use the term culturally responsive or culturally relevant pedagogy, forget that the base of the word is culture. So, culture has to do with worldviews, beliefs, language, it has to do with values. Culture, to me, at its essence, are the things that, those filters that help us as human beings make sense out of the most ordinary things. Culture can be grouped into 2 different kind of categories. You can talk about visible culture and invisible culture, or tangible and intangible. The tangible, I would translate that to say the crafts, the music, the art, the technology. And those are important, but I think the more important are the intangible.
And these are values, beliefs, feelings, opinions, perspectives, assumptions.
So culturally relevant pedagogy, one of the primary premises is that teachers take students' everyday lived cultural experiences and make the appropriate linkages between what the students know and do and understand, and come up with examples, comparisons, and contrasts. They make the connections. They are cultural translators. They are cultural bridge builders. I think when we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, we have to remember that students approach learning not as cultural blank slates. So they bring into the classroom all of those cultural experiences. And so it is very compatible with what we know about good teaching. Culturally responsive pedagogy builds on students' prior knowledge. And in this case, we're talking about prior cultural knowledge, making connections between what is known and what is to be taught and understood.
So part of the argument of cultural responsive teaching is the dilemma has been an incompatibility between the cultural filters that have been used to send instructional messages to students that's coming from the school frame of reference. And when kids from different ethnic backgrounds are trying to learn that, they are trying to receive what we send from school through another set of cultural filters. And if they don't match, then nothing's happening. So cultural responsive teaching then says is that rather than always insisting that the students adapt to the culture of the school needs to adapt and modify some of its sending messages, its sending mechanism.
When we think about what matters most about culture, I think the first thing to remember is that students are not mere representatives of a cultural or ethnic group. And first and foremost, they are individual students who have individual needs and interests, etc. Students who belong to an ethnic group, their attachment and bonds to the group vary, for example, in terms of how long they've been in this country, social class, and their own experiences in the community and neighborhood.
Because if we think about students' culture, we make culture a trait of that individual based on his or her membership in a particular community, conflating race and ethnicity with culture. We don't take race off the table at all, but we're really pulling apart what culture is and making sure we don't conflate it, because if we do, then we make cultural practices a trait of that person's membership in that particular community. And that leads us, of course, to make very easily slip into one size fits all, that my Latino children learn this way, or my African American children need X, right? And so it's making culture a trait of the individual. It's been very problematic in the implementation of culturally relevant pedagogy.
So now I would like to talk about what culture responsive teaching is and what culture responsive teaching is not. Because when I work with educators, it just seems like there's this misconception of culturally relevant and culturally responsive teaching, and educators always want give me strategies, tell me what to do, just give me a checklist. And there is no checklist, you know. Latson Billings says it herself. It is a mindset. It's a way of life. It's a way of what you think about the students in front of you and how you respond and act and educate it. How does your pedagogy or your thoughts inspire your pedagogy? And so culturally relevant and responsive teaching, it's not just these steps that you can follow to be successful with your culturally, linguistically, economically, ethnically diverse students. It is not something that we're going to do in addition to or to supplement our curriculum. It is embedded into your curriculum. It should be a part of every day, and present in every piece of instruction that you provide from your curriculum. It's not just exclusive to diversity and inclusion or multiculturalism. It's not just, I like to say, hallways, holidays, and heroes, but it's not just hip hop and homage too. We're not just playing hip hop music and playing homage. And it's not only for culturally, linguistically, economically, or ethnically diverse students. White students have a culture too, and they can benefit from culturally responsive pedagogical practices or culturally relevant pedagogical practices. It's a mindset, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay. It's about believing in the ability of every student, knowing that every student can and will succeed, and that every student can be educated. And because you know and you believe this, you are going to do what you have to do to build up the skill and build up the capacity of every student to do rigorous work and be academically successful. It's understanding the importance of cultural references to learning and understanding the individual learning needs of each and every student, and doing in your classroom what is necessary to educate that particular student. Okay. It's the rejection of dominant cultural norms. And so stop trying to fix kids. In your classroom, you allow them to be themselves and understand all of the magic and the assets that they possess. And you tap into those and you use that to educate them. It's given every student what they need to be successful. Like Gloria Ladson Billings says, it's just good teaching. There is no formula to it. There are components of it, but it's really rooted in what you think about who you teach and what you do with this knowledge of who you teach. Okay. And so, foundational to culturally responsive teaching, culturally relevant teaching, is knowing your students. Okay. So, when we look at knowing our students, okay, it's important that we first understand our own identities and how our identities shape who we are and how we interact with others. And so examining our identities also help us to identify any biases that we might have and how these biases turn into these microaggressions and overall how they manifest in our learning spaces. And so before we can get to know our students, we have to continuously explore our own identities, our own positionalities, our own intersectionalities, and how they show up in the classroom. And so within your workbook, I have this identity chart, and I want you to really stop and reflect on your own identity and how your identity pretty much just shapes what you think, what you believe, and how what you think and believe impacts what you do. Okay. After you examine your own identity, then I want you to think about one of your students, right? Think about one of your students who does not show up, right? And you may say, well, I don't know anything about them. Somebody know them. Somebody know who they are. Somebody know where they are. Somebody knows how to get in contact with them. But I want you to think about that student, okay? Or I want you to think about that student who comes into class but doesn't turn the camera on, okay? Or that student who shows up, but when you put them in the breakout room, they jetting out. Or that student who shows up with the hood tied up on their head and just low engagement. What do you know about that student? What do you know about that student? And how does that information that you know about that student, is it accurate? Is it very surface level? Is that really who they are? What can you do to learn what you don't know about your students? And most importantly, how does your student's identity show up and shape how they interact with you or how they interact with others? Okay. Here's the one thing: we don't know our students for sure. Okay. We can make these assumptions, but if we're not interacting with our students, if we're not interacting with their families, these assumptions are going to continue to remain assumptions. And sadly, we try to meet our students' cultural, social, and emotional needs based on these assumptions, or what we know about their surface identities. And so, what do I mean by surface identities? Well, if we go to the work of Zaretta Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, she has her culture tree. And the culture tree is broken down into the surface culture, the shallow culture, and the deep culture. And in order to be effective, culturally relevant, and responsive educators, and before we can bring students' realities into our pedagogical practices, we have to be intentional about building relationships with students, each and every student, so that way we can get beyond these surface level cultural traits that are commonly incorporated into our classrooms. And that again is that hip hop, hairstyles, holidays, paying homage to certain individuals, that artwork. Our goal is to get beneath the surface level. Now, incorporating these surface level cultural traits into our classrooms, they're helpful. Okay, the music, the holidays, the heroes, they're great, but they're going to have a low level impact when it really comes to connecting with students, transforming our instruction, or transforming students academic experiences. And so it's very critical for us to be intentional about continuously to create spaces and opportunities for us to dig deep to understand students' cultural values, because it's in these deep rooted parts of our cultural trees where we develop self concept, group identities, approaches to problem solving, decision making. And this is what grounds our students and nourishes their mental health. And so it's our goal to use this deep cultural information and knowledge about our students to reach and teach every student and create these learning spaces where all students are capable of thriving and being successful. And so, how do we cultivate these culturally responsive learning spaces where all students can thrive, even during a pandemic? My answer is real love. Okay. So, what does real love look like in classrooms and schools? So, real love is first building relationships with students that are respectful and embrace and celebrate their cultures in their communities. It's putting connection over content and embedding in each and every day that opportunity to build relationships and build community with our students to get to know our students. It's engaging students in a culturally relevant, responsive, and realistic manner. Okay. So before we can do this, we have to know our students, but then we also have to know ourselves. Knowing what we know about our students, we are embedding instructional opportunities that are bringing in their culture, that are bringing in their interests, that are bringing in their passion, and speaking their language to transform and the learning experiences and opportunities that we create and we design for our students. If we're going back to the 7 strategies of effective teaching by Dr. Emden, we are building relationships with these students and asking students, what is it that inspires you at this moment? What are you passionate about at this moment? What is important to you at this moment? What obstacle are you facing at this moment? And how can I use my instruction in this classroom to help you deal with your now, help you make solve a problem, help you identify a problem first, then solve a problem to something that is important to you? How can I use my classroom to humanize you or humanize someone else, celebrate you, celebrate someone else? How can I, and see that's the thing. When I think about culturally relevant teaching and culturally responsive teaching practices, I always wonder, how do people miss these words? Relevant. How can I make learning relevant to who you are? Responsive. How can I respond to what you need through my instruction every single day, every student, every day? The next thing is being authentic in our interactions with students in instruction. Okay. Authentic in our interactions, in our instructions, and being authentic in our interactions with students. It's creating this safe space, this learning environment where students know that we're teaching to the whole child. We're loving on the whole child. They know that they are cared for and not just cared about. And what I mean by cared for is that we're going to go out of our way to make sure that all of their needs are met. Their social, emotional, cultural, and academic needs are met. Then we look at authentic instruction. You know what? I'm going to be honest with you, and this is something that I had to hold myself accountable to doing. Half of the students that we see who are not showing up are likely not showing up because what we are teaching has nothing to do with their now, right? Think about that. Is what you are teaching in your classroom giving them what they need to make it through right now? I like to be humble, open, and transparent with you guys in anything I do. And so when I think about instruction, I think about my nieces and nephews. My sister, unfortunately, struggles with a drug addiction. And she has been sober and clean, and she entered this pandemic sober and clean. But then through the pandemic, she lost her housing. And from losing her housing, it put her and her children back into extended living hotel. And I think about their teachers. Do their teachers know that? How do their teachers expect them to want to show up to virtual learning and even care about what's going on when they're sitting in a motel hotel with their four other siblings, trying to stay focused on work, not really knowing what shape or condition their mother is in, don't really want to reach out to anyone for help, having to watch siblings? What can we do through our instruction to create these authentic learning experiences and opportunities for our students to solve issues that are important to them now, right now? That's what it means to be relevant and responsive in our instruction. Okay. And so when we look at what this looks like, we'll talk about that a little later, but in your learning environment, okay, are you creating a learning environment that speaks to the social, emotional, and cultural needs of all of your students? And yes, you can do that in a virtual space. It's about allowing students to see positive representations of themselves consistently throughout your virtual space or throughout your classroom. It's about allowing students to see positive representations of their communities. It's about our actions speaking louder than our words. Whose voices are you centering in your learning spaces, in your curriculum, in your instruction? Whose truth are you telling? I like to say with Twisted Teaching, three things. We like to be real. We like to be real, walk in love, and teach truth. And are you doing that? Just think about this. If the walls in your in your classroom could talk, or if somebody got a hold of a recording of your classroom, what would it say about what happens in that room? What would it say about who do you hold to high expectations and standards and who you don't hold to high expectations and standards? What would it say about the instruction that's being taught? I like to say this. A lot of the reason that we may not be, students may not be doing what we expect them to do is because they know that we really don't expect them to do it, or that expectation is very um, surface level. So, have you relaxed your expectations for all students because of the situation? So, this next component is love. Okay. So, what does love look like in a classroom? It's being loyal to our students. Sometimes we got to deviate from the plan in the best interest of our students. Um, I know of people who work in a school district where the school district is still requiring them to give 2 assignments a week. If the student ain't doing 1 assignment, why are you having teachers give 2 assignments? Right? So loyalty to our students is we're deviating from the plan. It is no longer business as usual. We are meeting students where they are and enjoying them in that moment. Okay. Kids don't need to be fixed. Everything about every student should be celebrated and embraced in our classrooms. Students deserve us as educators to be their ride or die. We have their backs no matter what. In your classroom, how are you creating a space for students to process any obstacles or barriers that they face and overcome those obstacles or barriers. Okay. So social emotional learning is critical to culturally responsive teaching. Dina Simmons says that culturally responsive teaching or social emotional learning without culturally responsive teaching is like white supremacy with a hug. But how are you educating the whole child in your classroom? And how are you helping your students overcome anything that stands in their way? Because honestly, if they're worried about where their next meal is coming from, I go back to what the story I shared at the beginning. I didn't hate learning. I just had too much other stuff on my mind to even care about what you were teaching, right? So cliche, but I wasn't blooming because my immediate needs were not met. Vision for your students. How are you supporting students and creating a vision that goes beyond their current reality, right? Right now, like I said, a lot of students don't see a way out. I didn't see a way out, but I had educators who were very intentional about understanding that despite what they saw in front of them, despite the conditions that I was living in and growing up in, despite what my mother or father did or my siblings did, I still had potential and they were going to provide me with what I needed to reach that full potential. And that's when it comes to the last thing, educating students for a future they cannot currently see. In your classroom, are you holding to high expectations despite the situation for all of your students? What do you believe about your students and how is what you believe about them showing up in what you do for them? Every student should be provided with the tools and the resources and the skills necessary to enter either college or the career force. But you do not get to dictate what they can and will do once they leave their classroom based off of what you see now. And then lastly, how are you creating the opportunity for students to get out in their communities? How are you giving back to their communities? How are you modeling to them to give back to their communities? Um, Gloria Ladson-Billings says is that culture responsive teachers see themselves as members of the community and encourage their students to do the same. And so that's what real love looks like in our classrooms in our schools. So in a virtual space, just to kind of provide a summary, real love is providing those daily opportunities for community building. Okay. Not only building community with your teachers, but also building community with peers and each other. It's providing that opportunity to collaborate and learn from others. It's giving our students voice in instruction design and process and how knowledge is deposited within to them and how we withdraw information from them. It is giving students a choice in how they demonstrate knowledge. And so our content, our process, and our products are relevant and responsive to students' realities. In our classrooms, we are providing inquiry, problem solving opportunities where students can collaborate to identify, explore, and solve present problems and issues that are relevant to them and to their communities. And it's lastly understanding that all students can and will thrive. And so, because you know and you understand and you believe this, you are creating learning experiences that are differentiated. You're providing feedback that is relevant and timely. You're giving multiple opportunities for students to self assess and then also provide you with feedback. And you are teaching to the whole child. And so, what that means is that you are celebrating uniqueness and individuality of every student and tapping into the cultural funds of knowledge that students possess to educate them. You are discussing issues that are important to them and providing space for them to discuss and formulate solutions to these social, political, and economic issues. You are constantly challenging the status quo and disrupting inequities inside and outside of your learning spaces and preparing students to do the same thing. You are being intentional about knowing who your students are and what obstacles they face and how you can support them and overcoming those obstacles so that they can thrive. I want to take you back to this picture, okay? Because, like I said, What you guys saw earlier was the surface level stuff. And I don't want us to leave this presentation not understanding the importance of digging deep into who our students are and what they need and going beyond the surface level stuff. We can't rely in front of us. So don't make final decisions about who's not showing up, who didn't turn on their camera, who didn't participate, and let what you see now shape what you do for students and how you set them up for the future. So I want to go back to this picture because it was the educators, like I said, that you didn't see in this picture. It was the educators who, throughout middle school and throughout high school, Miss Hyde, Mr. Kennard, Miss Pearson, who they saw gold inside of me. And so they knew there was gold inside of me and they mined for that gold and they allowed me to shine. Um, there's power in real love. I just want to say that. There's power in real love. My journey was not easy. And because I carried trauma from classroom to classroom, I often struggled to transition to one grade to the next. However, it was because of the relationship that teachers developed with me, because they connected with me on a deeper level, because they walked alongside me in my journey, because they had a vision for me that I could not see, and because they consistently held me to high expectations and educated me for a future that I did not believe was possible. This stands in front of you. And on June 17th, 2004, I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school. May 6th, 16th, 2008, I was the first to graduate from college. Like I said, I share with you guys about my older sister. My oldest brother was just released from prison, and my younger brother is sitting in a prison right now, facing 40 years. And I'm often asked again, how were you able to chart a different course in life? And my answer will always be real love. It was the teachers who kept it real with me and showed me love that I needed, that set my mind and heart free. I need you guys to dig beyond the surface level stuff. Keep it real with your students and show them love every day. You may not see these immediate results. I'm not saying that they're going to start turning their cameras on, or they're going to start showing up. But if we keep doing it every day, your efforts can possibly transform the lives of students in the future. Last year, I had the opportunity to speak with my preschool teacher, Mrs. McDowell. And in this conversation, she said that she always wondered what happened to me and my oldest brother. And hearing that I went on to graduate from college and that I'm now an educator myself, she said that that made her days, the hard days with us, worth it. Because she saw the large impact of a small investment that she made in my life. And so, educators, what we do matters. And I know we know this, but don't lose hope. While it may seem like now is impossible, and we're up so against so many obstacles, what we do in our classrooms and what we do in our schools and how we do it can not only transform students' lives, but it has the power to transform generations. And thank you. Again, my name is Alexis Terry. I am the founder of Twisted Teaching. I'm the author of Real Love Strategies for Reaching Students When They See No Way Out. You can connect with me on social media. I have a Facebook page, Twisted Teaching. I am on Twitter, and I also provide digital content via YouTube. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation, and I hope to see you in the Twisted Teaching community. All right, I'm out.